It's the first episode of April. Hey, how are you doing? Welcome to a new month. Are you excited? We are in the fourth month of 2021. Thank the Lord. It is moving along just so nicely, so smoothly. Tomorrow, or this episode will air just right before Easter. So happy Easter, or happy early Easter, or if you are celebrating or if you're off or any of those things, just want to wish you all a very happy Easter. And I'm so glad that you've tuned in and you're rejoining a conversation that we started last week in the Christian space. Well, my name is Nash, and I'm really excited to be the host of this podcast here, the URC space, where we are intentionally unboxing our lives one blank space at a time. And like I said, we are continuing our conversation in the Christian space. We are talking about being frustrated and faithing it. And in part 2 today, we're going to be wrapping it up, bringing it home. And I really hope that many of you enjoyed this conversation. I see that it is the most played episode in the last 3 weeks. So it seems to have been getting a lot of chitter chatter. And I got a lot of feedback from many of you who tuned in. And I want to thank you for just sharing your hearts, being transparent, being open and candid, and just letting me know, like, yeah, you know, Nash, when you said Christian, like, I was like, I don't know about all this. And when I actually listened and tuned in, I was like, oh, you know, it kind of gave a different perspective. So I just want to thank you for trusting me here in the Christian space. And I'm hoping in our continued conversation today, we will be able to keep that trust going. Are you ready? So, you know, here in the Christian space, we're talking about having doubts, having questions, and having second guesses. And with, you know, Christianity, again, you know, like, I am not coming from a perspective of not wanting to force, push, in any of that onto anyone who is listening. You know, we're just having a conversation. And last week we talked about John Steingard, who was the former lead singer of the Christian rock group Hawk Nelson. He also was the former main songwriter for the group. And he had shared, you know, we're in April now. So almost, it was in May of 2020. So almost a year ago, he had shared how, you know, he had been having this dissonance, this conflict in himself, questions and wanting to know things and not really understanding, you know, well, if this is this and why is that? And he came to an awakening moment where he just realized that he just no longer believed in faith. He no longer believed in God. And he said that was really hard. And I think we as Christians put people in a precarious situation when we're not allowing the questioning and the reasoning and the doubting and all of that to be, you know, given the green light. Like, it's okay to have questions. It's okay to second guess. It's okay for all of those things. Because when you think about it, the concept of believing in something that you cannot see is very hard. And I think we do it to some extent every day. Like, you know, we can't see the CO2 going out of our bodies or the carbon dioxide going out of our bodies and the oxygen coming in. But, you know, it's one of those things, we can't see it, but we know that it's there. But when we're having conversations about faith, which is something that is multi-level, multi-dimensional, you know, that brings just a whole floodgate of questions that need answers before anyone can move forward with saying that they're all in. And I completely get where John's coming from and his statement. And I shared with you, you know, many times here on the show, we talked about it, where I have wrestled with my own questions and my own doubts with when it comes to, you know, faith in God and Christianity. And as I've gotten older, many of the questions and tests and challenges that I have had as it relates to the Christian faith, a lot of them came up when I was in the peak of my career of working on ships and just seeing different things and being exposed to different things, which I am talking about in the book. Don't worry, you're going to get a full 100% all access backstage pass to the different questions and the different times when, you know, certain things just rose up into me. The book will be coming out soon, and that's all I can say is soon. So stay tuned. Once I have a date set in stone, I'll let you know. But when we're looking at Christianity and we're looking at the message of Christianity, it's very simple to me. You know, the basis of Christianity is all roads to God are through Jesus. And he is God, you know, who came here in human form. He lived as such. He was tempted in every way. And he offered in exchange for following him eternal life with God, the Father. Like, that's it. He offered it. So I said offered, not forced. It's a personal decision. It's not a public mandate. And, you know, this is something that someone picks for themselves, you know, like the way you pick the kind of car you want to drive, or what you want to eat for lunch, or, what kind of bed you're going to sleep in. That is a personal decision that you make for yourself. There's a lot of people out here who will tell you, or influencers, that you should eat this for, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or you should sleep in this kind of a bed, or you should drive this kind of a car. But at the end of the day, it's your personal decision. But everything is presented before you to consider. And I see Christianity as that as well. It is not something where you are forced. And Jesus was never known to be someone to force people to do anything. It was just an open decision. And, that just seems very simple, right? Okay, all roads lead to me. This is what I'm presenting before you. So how does something so simple become so complicated? And how did it get so complicated? There's a quote that I read from Mahatma Gandhi. You know Gandhi from India. He was one of the leaders of nonviolent restorative justice, who inspired, the late great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he said this quote, which is just very profound. And he said, "I like your Christ. I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ." Wow. I mean, we got somebody who is not even a Christian from the outside looking in. He's like, oh, everything Jesus is saying, or everything Jesus is about, I'm totally for. But everyone else who's kind of joined the party saying that they're also following him, I don't think that they've got the correlation correct. Something is just a little bit off. And I think for me, when I look at it and really just taking a step back, for me, it just seems like, we have gotten the word, when I say we, I'm talking as Christians as a whole, collectively, we have gotten the word love so out of its definition, so out of its perspective, and we are just not doing it well. Jesus gave us just a very, basic commandment of just loving one another. In John 13, verses 34 through 35, he says, I give you a new commandment, that you should love one another, just as I have loved you, so that you too should love one another. By this, all men know that you are my disciples, if you love one another, if you keep on showing love among yourselves. So again, something so simple. I was talking to my friend Sierra not too long ago, and we were having a conversation just about life and how many people can just complicate life because it just seems like it needs to be complicated. And some people simplify it because simplifying can be the thing that people see needs to be the focus. I was just kind of taken aback by her perspective on wow, people can just make things that are complicated so simple, and people can make things that are so simple so complicated. And I don't know what that's all about. I'm just speaking from my own heart and from what I've absorbed. But I think man has their ploys for mind control and personal gains, and even, if I dare say, manipulation, which can really turn into us elevating the lives of, or the life of a man or a person over that of God. And that is when things get really weird, because then we're celebrating the creation over the creator, and we're making idols, and it gets really complicated. And the funny thing is, last night I was watching a documentary. I really love watching documentaries, all kinds, shapes, sizes, volumes, genre. I love documentaries. And I was watching a documentary last night on Jonestown, which, if you're not familiar with Jim Jones and Jonestown and what happened down in Guyana, this happened in the late 70s, 1978, 79, I do believe. I would say he started as a Christian, right? I mean, it was the Bible, the People's Temple, I think is what their affiliation was, or he was using the Bible or parts of the Bible to some degree. And they were based out of Southern California, which is on the West Coast of the U.S. for my international friends listening. And he was able to convince all of those who were in his congregation who were following him to move to Guyana. And they moved to Guyana right outside of the capital city. The capital city there is Georgetown. They built Jonestown. And, they were all kind of, they gave up their life savings and, whatever else they had. And they moved down there, and they were, quote unquote, happy. They kept following Jim Jones and what he was saying. And, it got to the point to where Jim was like, okay, we're going to go be in heaven. In order for us to be in heaven, we got to drink this drink. And, they put the poison in this Kool-Aid, and they all drank it, and they all died. And it was this huge mass murder suicide. It was all over the news, back then. And still, people are talking about it today here. We're talking about it here on the show. And I'll leave a link to the documentary that I was watching if you want to know a little bit more about Jonestown and all of that. But I was watching that wow, here's something so simple, right? Jesus says, love one another. And now we have a man who is, saying, okay, don't just love one another, but you need to follow me and give me your money and drink this Kool-Aid with this poison in it. Like, how does something so simple just become so complicated? And it goes back to the whole thing of what Gandhi had said, like, your Christians are so unlike your Christ. And there is a very simple thing about Jesus, and there's a very relational thing about Jesus. I think when people can just read without the commentary and the barking and the noise from what man wants to add into it, when people see it for themselves. And it convicts me to simply just meet people where they are. And I have been challenged in this area for maybe the last 5 or 6 weeks. I've just had some relationships in my life where I've some revealed information has just come out, and information that I didn't know before, and information that was very shocking, or shocking in the sense I didn't know, certain things. And I've had to position myself to really love well. And that's one thing that I'm thriving to do, is just continuing to just love well and meet people where they are. And I think, in the whole Christendom and in the Christian world, we have a really bad habit of being very judgmental, very critical, very Pharisee-like. And like I said on the show, I used to be just like that. And I still have the propensity to be like that. It doesn't mean that I'm beyond that. I have to look in the mirror before I talk to anybody else to remind myself of the things that I struggle with, the things that I'm going through, the things that I wish weren't a part of my life or a part of my story, or things that I just, I don't want people to know, and it gives me the grace to meet people where they are. And, I love this parable that Jesus told in Matthew 21, when he was telling the story of the two sons. And, in the Message translation, he says, Jesus said, tell me what you think of this story. And he was talking to the religious people. A man had two sons. He went up to the first and said, son, go out for the day and work in the vineyard. The son answered, I don't want to. Later on, he thought better of it, and then he went. And then the father gave the same command to the second son, and he answered, sure, glad to go. But then he never went. Jesus asked him, so which of the two sons did what the father asked? And they said, the first. And Jesus said, yes. And I tell you that crooks and whores are going to precede you into God's kingdom. John the Baptist came to you showing you the right road. You turned your noses at him, but the crooks and the whores believed him. Even when you saw their changed lives, you didn't care enough to change and believe him. And, when I talk about that critical and judgmental, like here, Jesus is talking about crooks and whores. He's like, some of these crooks and whores who actually believed, they're the ones that are going to beat you into the kingdom of God, because, you have made it such a point to be just very unlike me, and not love people. And, I was talking to my Yami. Yami is the term I use for my other mother, Yam, your other mother, Yami, your other mommy. So I was talking to my Yami, and she and I were having a conversation about, just, criticalness and people just being judgmental. And she had said something so profound. She said, people forget that when they have conversations, they need to allow people to sit on the grace couch. And I was like, ooh, I like that one. I'm using that. The grace couch is where, we, again, like I was saying, I look in the mirror before I talk to anybody else, because I don't have it together. I'm hoping to have it together, but I don't have it together. And it's very easy for us to point out what's wrong with someone else before we can really point out what's wrong with us. And when we realize that we're just as flawed, we're just as imperfect as every other person, it really brings a different perspective to how you engage and love one another. So where does this leave us, right? So we got questioning faith, don't know, any of this. And the reason why I'm talking about the critical and the judgmentalness is because the behaviors of a lot of what I saw in Christianity and in the Christian faith is what brought me to having a lot of the questions and doubts that I had. John's story last week was a little bit more on the theology of Christianity and interpretation of scripture. And if this was imperfect, that means that this wasn't perfect. So that's where his basis was. And all of our questions come from different roots or triggers, if I can use that word here. But I think, it comes down to us not mixing religion for relationship, right? Like, people feeling like they need to go to church every Sunday and, oh, if I don't go to church every Sunday, or if I'm not in Bible study every week, then I'm not a Christian, or I'm not a good Christian. And we get caught up in this religious system, and, that whole religious system that can really be manipulated by man. And that's why I said manipulation earlier, because you look at that whole Jonestown situation that went down with Jim Jones, like that was complete manipulation, and people went along with it and they fell for it. And so, like, when thinking about this, I think of another story of in my dating history, where I was dating this one girl, and really, like, just a great girl. She's also a Christian. She traveled around the world, very worldly, very knowledgeable about things. And it was funny because we got on this conversation about church very early on, and she had said that she was really missing her church, and she hadn't been for a few weeks because she was sick and she didn't want to be exposed, or she didn't want to expose people to her sickness or whatever. And I said, oh, okay, cool. And what I told her was, take all the time you need to get well, but your right standing with God is not based off of your church attendance. This isn't like a check mark kind of a thing. And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah. And then I just went into kind of full disclosure. I was like, well, I've been a Christian all my life, but I have not been into a physical church building with regular attendance for years. And she had said that, and she was like, oh, like, well, why is that? And then that was on, oh, well, I used to work on a cruise ship and I traveled the world and all of this. And so even on Sundays, I didn't always have time to, go into a church in whatever city or wherever I was, because I was working. And then I went on to say, and my relationship with God is still intact, and I still believe that, he loves me very much. And I love him very much, but I do not attach my attendance to a church with my, validity of being a Christian. And she just was like, that's blasphemy. There's no way that you can say that. Like, we didn't talk anymore. Great, because that's not a person I want to be with anyway. But she was just very taken aback by like how I was saying that. And perhaps in a dating situation that probably came off too strong. But what I want to say here with our conversation is simply, we don't need to get so caught up into the legalism of doing this and doing that. And did I do this right? And did I do that right? It's all about building a relationship for yourself. And I think that happens when we can just open the Bible, start a relationship that is influenced solely by our own desire and our own personal choice and decision. Just like I said, like how you shop for a bed or for a car or for something to eat. You make that personal decision, and that's a personal decision between you and God. And I think even in that, with going to church, we always have to be able to check what man says to what the Bible says, because there's some things that even my pastor is saying, I believe that, we need to do this, we need to do that. I'm like, I don't think that, nope, that doesn't line up to what's in scripture. So I'm not going to go along with that. You know what I'm saying? And, Christian does not always mean pure. It doesn't always mean holy. It doesn't always mean saved. It doesn't always mean immune from whatever everyone else struggles and deals with. So let's look at a few examples of what I mean here. So Jerry Falwell Jr., who is the former president of Liberty University, which is the largest Christian university in the world, based out of Lynchburg, Virginia, but they have a huge online presence. So, students all over the place. He and his wife got caught up in a very interesting situation with their pool boy, allegedly. And there was some alleged cuckold situation going on between the three of them, and some alleged hush money and blackmailing and, just a whole bunch of just craziness, right? Something that you see like in a Hollywood movie. And then you got Pastor Carl Lentz, who allegedly had an affair on his wife and cheated on his wife, and he's married and he's a pastor, Hillsong, New York. He's Justin Bieber's pastor. He baptized Justin Bieber in, that basketball player's bathtub. Just like a couple weeks ago, gospel singer and Grammy Award winner Kirk Franklin was, there was a video leaked of him cussing out his son on the phone. And, gospel singer James Fortune, he went down, allegedly, for Kirk Franklin. And allegedly, gospel singer James Fortune was beating his wife, and he was a wife beater. And allegedly, Leandria Johnson, who also is a Grammy Award winning gospel singer, alcoholic, children out of wedlock, allegedly, so there are all of these things that have happened to very prominent Christians, right? And when the world sees that, it makes me cringe a bit, because I'm like, oh my goodness, this is all people know Christians to be. We say one thing, but then we live something else. And I think when we can get on that grace couch that Yami was talking about, and we can look at ourselves in the mirror before we want to have a conversation with someone, or even, try to tell them anything about Jesus, it will bring just a different humility to each and every one of us. And I love what the lead singer of Skillet and one of the founding members of Skillet, which is a very well-known around the world band, John Cooper, this is what he had to say. He said, "My conclusion for the church, all of us Christians, is we must stop making worship leaders and thought leaders or influencers or cool people or relevant people the most influential people in Christendom. And yes, that includes people like me. I've been saying for 20 years and seem probably quite judgmental to some of my peers that we are in a dangerous place when the church is looking to 20-year-old worship singers as our source of truth. We now have a church culture that learned who God is from singing modern praise songs rather than from the teachings of the word." And that's what happened with Jonestown. They weren't in the word for themselves. They were going by what a man was saying. And then, there was this, you get led astray. Does it hurt when man does not show Christianity and God in a good light? Of course it does. And it does make me cringe. But I think, what I've learned in my own questioning and in my own doubts with my faith is that if my relationship a true one with God is really intact, it will overrule whatever the latest displays of, whatever Christian this week wants to publicly fall. That frustration that I have, it will help put that somewhere, else and quiet that noise, which, and I think if we don't quiet that noise, then it will potentially lead us to having more frustration. It is hard, even as a Christian, seeing many publicly fall from grace. But the one thing that I can say at the end of the day, when I look at myself in the mirror before I talk to someone else, is I say, God, I thank you that I am not as public as a number of these individuals who have fallen publicly or who are under public scrutiny or the public eye. And, we just got to just thank God that our struggles aren't public, right? Because God is always dealing with the heart. And as John said, John Steingard, the former lead singer of Hog Nelson last week, I read his quote. He said, humans are flawed and imperfect, but I'm going to say that God is not. And when we really open ourselves to just consider God and have our own pursuit and our own relationship with him, he has an amazing life in store. And that is one that we can just fully embrace. There was a lot that was said today. There was a lot that we unboxed, and I hope it wasn't too much coming at you. If it was too much to bite off the chew, I hope you'll go back and you'll replay it and listen again. And, if you're feeling a flood of questions coming to you about our chat today, or something was said or discussed or pulling on your heart, and you want to speak with someone about what faith in Jesus would look like, to those both who are in and out of the faith, I want you to reach out to my friends over at the Hope Line. I'm going to leave their information in the Unboxed Goods section of today's episode description. Ooh, okay, so we all take a deep breath together. Now, I have a question for you. Are you a fan of Will Smith? Did you grow up watching The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air? Well, next week, we're going to be entering the reconciliation space, and we're going to be talking about what I would deem probably one of the most powerful moments in HBO history that involved none other than the Millennium himself from West Philadelphia. I hope you'll join me then. And if you're enjoying this show, would you mind to share it with a friend and leave a review for me there on Apple Podcasts? Leave your brother 5 stars. And if you're on the gram, let's get connected there. I would love for you to join me for the off-air conversations that I have on Instagram. You can find me at Nash Speaks Live, which, speaking of, I'm stepping away from it just a little bit. There is so much going on right now between this book, this podcast, and like 3 other things on the burner that I can't talk about right now. But there's so much happening that I'm reshifting my focus onto a number of different things. So I'm not walking away from Instagram. If you guys know, oh, he was on there every day. Now he's like, where is he? I am just making sure that I'm focusing my energy on what's before me. And I still will be engaged on Instagram. So hopefully you will join me there. But until we resume our conversations, I want you to remember to keep unboxing your life one blank space at a time, living undaunted, knowing you're unbreakable and embracing the reality that you're simply a treasure that's unfinished because you have been redeemed, restored, and reclaimed. That is a definite fact. Life is always best lived outside the box. Stay free, my friend, and I'll chat with you next week.